Okay, so onto the synth section of the track. Now, I like to do it similar to the bass section where I had like different types of bass sounds in there. I also like to do the same thing with my synth tracks, and a lot of people always ask me about how do I layer sounds and how do I get so much depth in my tracks, and that's basically all I do. I just layer lots of different types of sounds together. Sometimes I copy the MIDI parts over and just use different sounds on top of each other. Sometimes I'll move things along a few bars just to sort of mix things up a little bit. But yeah, you can experiment with these kind of things. This track that I'm going to be making is obviously club based, so the types of synth sounds that I'm going to be using for this are, I want an acid line sort of running all the way through it, but not like a 303 type acid line, more like a kind of pulsing sound, just to give it a little bit of sort of energy along. It sort of takes you along with the track. On top of that, I want a kind of stabby kind of chord type sound, which will be kind of tracky up until the point where there's a breakdown or there's a change in the track, and then I might make that more cordial. And also maybe some bleeps, effects and that kind of thing over the top. We'll probably do that part last. So first of all, let's put in a sort of acid line. Now, let's just load in a plugin here. I've got Roland's SH101 plugin. I'll just drag this in here. And it's a kind of acid sound that I'm looking for. I've got a sound here that I made earlier called Viacido. Now, I'll just play this back and I'll show you exactly the kind of sound that I'm talking about. Something like this over the top, and I want it kind of pulsing along, so it's like... something like this, sort of underneath. And I maybe want it to keep doing in a sort of a regular time. So sometimes when you're doing tracks like this and everything's in 4/4 constantly, things can get a little bit tedious. So I always like to do these kind of, I like to call them undergrowth sounds, where they're sort of under the main sort of big parts of the mix in slightly different timing. So I'll probably do this in 3s rather than 4s. So maybe like over 6 bars or 3 bars, for example. So to give you an example, I've already got I'll just take this 101 plug out just now because I've already got one loaded in. And here, these synths that I've loaded up, don't worry about the colour, they're not different synths. I just used the option to change the colour in here in case any of you don't have the Roland SH101 plugin. And the reason I've loaded this one up is because I've already set it up with my MIDI controller here. So I've got my amplifier and my filter envelopes are already set up, and I've also got my frequency and on the filter set up on a rotary on my MIDI controller. So instead of like tediously you watching me sort of assign things on the screen, I'm sure most of you know how to do that already. And so I'm just going to play this note back and then use the filter on it so you can hear the kind of sound that I'm looking for. Let me just arm the right track here. So something very, very simple that we're going to be modulating all the way through the track. We're not going to be doing the modulation yet. We can do the modulation later when we're doing the structure, because that helps us build the track up at the right moments. But for now, let's just get this acid line in there. So let's keep it at that for the moment. So I'm going to play this back, and then I'm just going to start recording in a 3 or 6 bar sequence. And here you can see I've got the 3 bars done, all sort of almost perfect timing. I'll just quantize this by pressing Command U on the keyboard. I'm just going to select them all and also bring up the velocity to maximum on all of that. I'll change it, I'll change it to green just so that I know that it's a synth section. And I'll just name this sort of Acid 101 as the first part. And let's just play this back again. because this is a mid-type sound, let's get the EQ up here. Because this, I'll just close the one-on-one plugin just now. Because this is a mid-type sound, we don't need any of the bottom end. So when I'm playing this back, we can have a little look at the frequencies and see where we might need to make some little adjustments here. I'll put it on to pre and post first. Now I'm going to drag this slider along until I think it's just starting to affect the sound, and then bring it back a little bit. And that's all. This frequency has just been taken out, and because we're not using that for the bottom end. Now I do notice that the particular acid note that I'm playing is spiking a little bit. So what I'm going to do is just play this back and alter the frequency on the filter just to see how much of a difference it makes. So I can see when I bring the frequency down that there is a little bit of a peak there. I probably want to do a little bit of work to that, and we may as well do that while we're here. So if I just make a little notch here, make the Q9 again, I'm going to play it back and then bring the notch down exactly where the peak is. And then just play that back using the frequency on the filter. That's much less punchy in the bottom end, and it sounds a lot better. It's taking a little bit of that harsh sort of pulsing frequency off of that. So I'm really happy with that EQ on that. So you can see really simply and really quickly how effective you can get a really nice sort of synth sound in there. And as I say, we'll probably do the modulation on that later on. Let me just name these so we don't get, this doesn't get out of control. Just name it Acid 101. And this was the sub bass. I should have done this earlier, sorry. And this is the moog bass. And this is the claps. This is the hats. This is a kick. Okay, so yeah, already we've got like a nice acid line in there. The next thing we want to do is group this to the synth group and press the monitor on in. Sorry. So let's just play that back. Okay, that's already sounding quite nice there. And another type sound we want to get in there in the synth section, as I said, is a kind of stabby synth kind of sound that we can use for maybe chord parts as well later on. And this is going to give the track a lot of energy and become the main sort of powerful riff in the track. So let's load in another sound here. I'm going to go for Omnisphere from Spectrasonics, which is a really great plugin. Now I've already got a sound made up in here that I want to use for the tutorial, and if I just open up the browser and select user, change to fifths. Okay, so it's a kind of fifth sort of sound. Oh, if I just arm the right channel here. So it's got a lot of nice sort of character to it, and we can use some modulation and the filter and stuff like that again with this later on in the track when we're doing the structure. In fact, let's get one of these MIDI controllers set up on the filter just so I can play through the sound and you get a better idea what it's going to sound like. If I just host automation, if I select MIDI, move that, and then move one of the MIDI controllers. So this is now mapped, and you can see the cutoff on the filter is now mapped to my controller. So if I just play the sound back, quite a powerful sound there that we can use in this track, and should sit along nicely with the acid line. And as I said, we'll use this modulation when we're doing the structure. So let's get a pattern in here with this sound. Just bring the volume down on this sound a little bit so we can listen back to the track. Okay, so I've already got an idea of the kind of pattern that I want to put in here. It's going to be a kind of offbeat pattern with a sort of twist to it. So I'm just going to let this loop and then play along and see if I can get a nice pattern. In fact, before I do this, one thing I'm going to do, purely because of the temperature in this room is insane, so my computer's going crazy, and the fact that the two Monarch synths are using quite a lot of power, is I'm going to actually freeze these tracks, because we're not actually going to be doing any modulation on these tracks or doing any editing to them until we're doing the structure later on. So if I just select these channels and freeze them, this will allow us a bit more CPU. As I said, we're not going to be touching these anyway, so we can come back to these later on. And it's always a good practice to do this if you're going to be using a lot of different sort of plugins that use a lot of power. Just freeze the tracks and then unfreeze them when you want to work on them and freeze them again. At least that allows you to get your work done. And in case none of you know, in Ableton it freezes the tracks as a WAV file as you've currently got it set up. And if you've done any automation in any lanes, it also freezes them with those added. So this will give us a bit more CPU to work with. Something like this. Okay, so it sounds not too bad. I may adjust it a little bit. Let me just select everything, get the velocity set to maximum, and it's green. Bring the volume down a little bit again because it's still quite loud in the mix. And actually, first things first, I'm going to put this to 0 again and send it to the group channel. So I'll put that to the synth group, which is already monitored in, because we've already got one synth sound in there already. Okay, so that level's just enough to work with for the time being. Let's just have a listen back to this again, see if I can maybe change the pattern a little bit. Maybe do another one just to get some variation on that and compare them to see which one works best. Okay, so you can see me playing through these two different variations, and as the track progresses we can see which one works best with the bass line. What we don't want is for too much complication in that sort of area, because everything can get a little bit complicated when you've got using 2 or 3 different sounds in the same frequency range. Let me just go in and edit the sound a little bit. Okay, so that's sounding, I'll keep the reverbs off on that just now. So that sound is kind of what we're looking for. As I said, we might adjust it as we go along and see what else we can maybe do to it to make it a little bit more powerful. And as I said, we've got modulation to add in there as well. So that's two different synth sounds we've got in there. We've got the acid line and we've got this sort of stab sound. And actually, just to add on to this, the stab sound, as I said, we might make it a bit more cordial later on. We've already made it quite chordy by following the bass line. But what I mean by that is the fact that you can do something straight right through the main part of the track. Oh, and then for the sort of break. So that's what I mean by having something cordial later on in the track. But we're already kind of following the bass line with that, so I'm not sure whether we'll change that or not. We may again change it, put a variation on the pattern just to sort of break it up a little bit. That's something I'll probably do then. Okay, so we've got two bass lines in, we've got two synth sounds in, and I think the third type of synth sound is like a almost kind of used like an effect, but it's just something that's maybe got a little bit of sort of delay on it, something to fill some of the background space, and maybe like little bleeps, little flashes, little sounds, that kind of thing, to really sort of fill the background. So let's see what kind of sounds we can put in here. So let's get another sound in here that we're looking for. This time I'm going to use Yuhei Diva, which is a plugin I absolutely love. Unfortunately, it's such a monster when it comes to using CPU power that inevitably you have to freeze a lot of tracks, especially if you're using more than 2 instances of it. Using it without multi-core and draft accuracy, it starts to really put pressure on your CPU. So let me see. I've got a sound here that I want to use for the track. It's this one here, and as I said before, it's a sound that I want to have in the background, so it's like kind of just sort of background bubbly kind of effects noises. So this is the sound that I made. It's a nice sort of nice sound to fill the background, and you can use it up the scales just to give it that sort of full effect. Let's play back the track a little bit, and I'm just going to play along with this sound to see how it sounds in the mix. It's funny because listening to that straight away, a lot of people who will know my music will probably recognise that as a kind of sound that I do, and it's something that I always like to put in my tracks to fill the gaps. So I've got an idea of roughly what I want to do with this, so I'm just going to play this back again and click record and stick a few different options in and see what sounds better. So a half speed one, and then the full speed one is. So these are two very simple sort of synth patterns. I'll probably end up using both of these for different parts of the track. So I'm happy with them for the moment. Let's just create them as part of the track, and we can see if we can use them. So I'll just name these. This is going to be, I'll just call this Bubbles. And the Omnisphere one we'll name Stabs. And let's see. Bubbles 1, bubbles 2, stabs 1, stabs 2. Whoops. The reason I always like to keep my naming convention done pretty early is because it's really good to keep, when you put it into arrangement mode, it's really good to keep track of it. It becomes clear when you're looking at all the channels layered on top of each other, which what it is you're editing. I just noticed that the frozen tracks I can name as well, so it's subs, and this one is the moog. So we've got a few different synth sounds in here now. Let's make sure that this new one is in the synth group, and probably a good idea to have a look at the EQ for the stabs and the bubbles. So the stabs, let's get this pre and post. Let's have a little look at the frequencies. So I'm going to drag this high pass filter in to just before it starts affecting the sound. So there's a few little peaks here. I'm not sure exactly how much it's affecting things. Let's have another look. I'm going to leave that the way it is just now. I'll probably do a few little peak adjustments later on once we can see what the frequency responses are like in the group channel. And let's leave the EQ on that for now. And the bubbles that we just put in, let's have a look at the EQ for that. Play it back. Oops. It's over here. Again, I'm going to drag this high pass filter in. This is a perfect example of the EQ change that I made. You can hear that a lot more prominently, the differences on this than you could the bass sound that we did at the start. So if I just A-B these together, you'll be able to see the difference that I'm talking about. So you can hear a massive difference there. Now, I can see that my CPU is obviously struggling to cope at the moment, so what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to freeze this. Now this will create, these two will then become wave files that you can play back, and as I said to you earlier on, you can always unfreeze them later on when you want to work on the track a bit more detailed. So let's do the levels on the synth group. Just going to solo the synth group and play back the three different sounds we've got so we can get the levels sort of roughly in the area that we're going to work with. Sounding pretty good. I think the acid sound maybe needs to come down by maybe 1.5, 2 dB. Let's try that. Even further actually, maybe 3 dB. And the bubbles also maybe need to come down. Because you only want the bubbles being in the background, you don't really want too much going on with that, so That's quite nice. Okay, those levels look quite good in there. So we've now done the 3 different synth sounds that we're going to use for the track, and a couple of variations on them as well in case we do a breakdown or whatever. And I think the next thing I'm going to do is revisit the drum section and maybe change the drum sounds that we've already got. If you remember back in the drum section, I did say that the drum sounds were just put in there initially to give us a beat to play with so that we could get our timing and get everything in. And it was never, or it might never have been the drum sounds that we intended to use. So we're going to go back into the drum section for part 2 of that and nail down the drum sounds that we're going to use and get lots of different percussion put in there so that we've got almost a full track on the go. And after the drum section we'll do the sort of strings in the background, sort of builds, and the way the track's developing, I'm not sure if I'm going to use any keyboards in this, but I will definitely use effects in the background. Keyboards can sometimes take up a lot of space in the spectrum, and the type of track it is doesn't really fit the mood, so I'll probably change the key group to like an effects group and use effects instead. But we'll see what happens. So first of all, let's go back to the drum group and get all the drums in full now.